I have this very clear memory of an incident that happened in the People's Republic of China nearly 40 years ago. I was standing in front of a urinal. It was 1985 and I was studying Chinese at Nanjing University. Actually, that was the top song in the US at the time. This was the top song in Nanjing. All the foreign students lived in the same dorm. The West Africans who spoke four languages and the North Koreans who wore their Kim Il-sung pins every day had come to China to learn hydrology and civil engineering so they could go home and nation build. But most of us Western students had plenty of time to take off and travel, and I'd headed to the east coast of China with a group of friends. Suzhou is known for its classical gardens and canals. The urinal was stainless steel and long, like a narrow horse trough. I was at the high end, and soon after I began, the room became silent. People started looking upstream to see who was responsible for the alarming neon green flow. By then I was used to it. A friend's mother had started sending us these giant packs of vitamins and supplements that were so potent they turned your stream into something that looked like uranium runoff. The fact that it was in a urinal made it even more shocking. But I now understand why Mrs. Gerstein was so concerned for our health. Our diet was carb-heavy and monotonous, with very few fruits or vegetables. I thought it was incredible. Nearly every day for lunch, a group of us would head to the same family-run food stand. At the time, Westerners were still rare enough in China to draw a crowd, and the oldest brother, a tall teenager with Mickey Jones hair, always found us a table no matter how busy it was. We came for the steaming bowls of mientiao, thick wheat noodles swimming in a magical broth.
Pork soup with these weird Chinese pickles in it and noodles. That's what we used to eat.
That's Ken, whose mother was responsible for our urine's glow. Today he lives in LA, where he provides technical support to movie companies. As I look back, I'm amazed at how little was actually in the broth. Some pork shrapnel and a few shreds of bai's eye or cabbage. What made it incredible was the hot sauce, congealed in small pots on every table. As you dropped in a glob, it melted and spread across the surface of the soup like an oil slick.
It was so good.
That's Nick, who came to Nanjing through a program at Berkeley. He ended up staying in China after our program, eventually living there for more than a decade. Today he's a charter school administrator in San Francisco. In the evenings, after our classes and a game or 10 or 20 of ping pong, we'd usually head out of the giant university gates for more street food.
You had to go as far as a restaurant. You could just get food right outside.
Once every couple of weeks, we'd go out for a special meal. At the time, Nanjing had almost no automobiles. The few we saw were green military trucks hauling soldiers from the People's Army, or blocky black sedans for party bigwigs that sped through the streets with red Chinese flags fluttering off the front bumper. The rest of us went everywhere on our heavy Pigeon brand bicycles, which during busy hours filled the entire street. The brand new Nanjing Hotel, the city's only Western-style inn, was about a 10-minute ride from the university. Most Chinese weren't allowed in, and there was usually a crowd gathered outside the fence staring at the foreigners and VIPs. We went for the cheeseburger for a taste of home. It was nothing special, at least not to us.
My roommate was Yenjie was his name, and I took him out to the hotel once to have a hamburger. It was a big splurge, and he had never had that much meat in like one sitting. He literally couldn't go to the bathroom for like 3 days.
My favorite place was the Wager restaurant. It served cumin-crusted lamb chunks barbecued on small skewers over hot coals. Most Chinese ate 2 or 3 of them, but that was an appetizer for Westerners who would typically clean out their entire meat supply. But most nights we stayed in the university neighborhood, eating fried wheat dumplings called guotia, or baozi, steamed buns.
It was basically these chicken baozi or whatever meat they put in that was mostly bread with just a few pieces of meat inside.
No matter the time, food stands always seemed open with a fresh batch ready when we arrived, a half dozen for a few cents. If it got late, we climbed over the university fence for a midnight snack. It occurs to me that I remember the tastes and smells of China much better than places or words, and those are the senses that make me the most nostalgic. I once dragged our entire family to New York City's Chinatown in Flushing because I read you could find Wager lamb there. We walked around for hours and were about to give up, but heading back to the subway, I suddenly smelled that same musty socks odor of charred cumin and lamb fat. We followed it to a small food cart that was serving the exact Lager lamb skewers I'd eaten in Nanjing a quarter century earlier. Still, after decades back in the States, I hadn't really given a whole lot of thought to the hundreds of steamed buns I'd powered through in China until my father-in-law made them for us one night in Denver. To those who knew him well, Blair Schatzenoff did not have a reputation as a 9 to 5 kind of guy. That's because those who knew him well knew that he had never really held what most people would recognize as a job. But he was incredibly well-read and informally educated in a surprising number of arcane skills, including cooking authentic Chinese food.
He lived in New York City until he was 50 years old, and he was agoraphobic and claustrophobic and didn't really have a job, so the only time he went out was way after dark, and he would walk up Broadway from West End Avenue up towards Harlem, and there were all these Chinese / Puerto Rican restaurants that were open that late, and he started eating there, and he met this guy named Antonio Chai.
That's Robin, his oldest daughter, my wife. Another thing Blair was known for was his vast, dishy, and insistent correspondence.
Antonio Chai was a lousy businessman, a manipulator of people and situations, a Chinese escapee from a merchant ship, and illegally a restaurant of New York, a hopeless destroyer of the English language after 10 years in this country. Chai was simply the finest and most inspired Chinese chef to cross my culinary path. His thin restaurant on Broadway and 106th Street became an uncontrollable habit several times a week.
When printed out, Blair's pork bun recipe appears in an imposing block of words, an unindented, single-space stream of consciousness paragraph. It's not especially complicated, but like the best recipes, it's much more than the sum of its ingredients and steps. Here's how it starts.
Instructions for the manufacture of Chinese steamed pork buns. Find Chinaman, give him a bun and pork. Tell him to steam same.
That's Coco, Blair's granddaughter. When she was 9, she wrote a paper for a school project about how much she loved sitting around with her grandfather eating slabs of bacon. She also described how he almost always was in his underwear. Blair's recipes were equally casual. My portions are strictly by feel, he writes at one point in the pork bun instructions when it's way too late to back out. The chronology can also be tricky. Long before you do any of the above, he writes about halfway through, get yourself a nice center cut of pork loin or several thick pork chops. But that's also what makes this a great recipe, that it's not really a recipe. It's Blair just telling you how to make pork buns. It's a profile with ingredients. I made Blair's pork buns a half dozen times since he gave me the recipe, and they haven't once failed to transport me. They're soft and stretchy and tangy and salty and slightly sweet, and especially good with homemade hot mustard sauce.